Good evening, everybody, and wherever you are around the world, good morning and good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. My name is Amy Lietman. I'm the president of NTM Info and Research, and I'll be the moderator for this evening's webinar. We are delighted to welcome back our favorite dietitian and nutritionist, Michelle McDonald. Michelle McDonald is a clinical dietitian and certified diabetes educator at National Jewish Health. She provides compassionate, comprehensive nutritional care to adult patients with various chronic conditions, including bronchiectasis, cardiovascular disease, chronic kidney disease, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, gastrointestinal disease, interstitial lung disease, non-tuberculous mycobacterial disease, overweight, rheumatoid arthritis, scleroderma, and type 2 diabetes. Michelle works closely with multidisciplinary teams of specialty clinics, counseling both inpatients and outpatients. She is dedicated to helping patients use nutrition as supportive therapy to manage disease and optimize health. Michelle completed a Bachelor of Science in Human Nutrition at Cornell University, a Master of Science in Food Science and Human Nutrition at Colorado State University, and a dietetic internship at the University of Northern Colorado. Welcome, Michelle. We're delighted to have you today for Q&A with a registered dietitian and nutritionist. So many of you have sent in your questions, and if you didn't, you can also type them into the Q&A. You type it into the box and then hit send. You can also type your questions in anonymously and check that box that says send anonymously. We'd like to thank our supporters. INSMED has been a great supporter of our programming, and we're delighted to be able to continue to bring you programming like this throughout the year. We thank everyone who supported us throughout the years. We are looking forward to bringing more programming like this to you in the coming year. Don't forget to find us on social media. We're on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. If you've missed any of our previous webinars, you can find them on YouTube on our channel. And if you want our latest news, you can sign up for that and learn more about us at ntminfo.org. Michelle, welcome. Thank you for joining us. You're on mute.
Take two. Thanks, Amy, and thanks everyone for tuning in. I'm looking forward to some of the questions, and I've gotten some of them beforehand. I haven't done a lot of prep, but I did take a look, and I think what we're going to do is have Amy ask the questions that have come in prior to the webinar, and I will just answer them live. And I'm also happy to try and take questions potentially if there are relevant questions to the answer that I'm giving, and try and make it interactive, and we can try and give that a go and see if it works out. NTMIR has enabled a live transcript function, which allows you to see the transcribed words. If you click on live transcript at the bottom of your screen, it says live transcript underneath it, and the icon is a rectangle with 2 C's in it.
Thank you. All right, everybody, let's get this started. Question number 1. Do you have any suggestions for making daily calorie counting less tedious?
Right. So I have to confess, I don't like calorie counting. So I do think in order to make calorie counting less tedious, you can, instead of counting every calorie, just try and count up from your baseline intake. So what I mean by that is, hopefully you have a sense for what you normally eat in a day, or even you could break it up by meal or by snack. You kind of know what you normally eat and how much that is. And I'm presuming that you want to increase your intake, although it works in reverse too if you want to decrease your intake. But what all you do is you say, I normally eat this, I'm going to bump it up. So you don't have to count everything you're eating. You're just going to increase your usual by 25% or maybe 50% or more if you can. And you can increase by adding something to what you're eating, or eating a larger portion of what you're eating, or concentrating the calories in it, which means you substitute You take out lower calorie items and you put in higher calorie items. So I think that's the easiest way to do it. Having said that, if you want to count every calorie, then I have to admit, I see a lot of people still track manually. They make charts on a piece of paper and they write things out. And it's, to some degree, for some people, that's easier. There are a lot of food tracking apps that are extremely convenient, in my opinion, but they still take time. You have to sometimes measure or scan, but measuring takes more time, the item, and write it out. It does take time. And so what you could do there is, to make that process less tedious, is just do it for, I don't know, 3 days, 5 days, over a period of time, so that you understand, you come to an understanding of what's in your food. And then you can get the gist of what you're eating. And then you don't necessarily have to keep doing it, but you go through the learning curve. And then once you've learned, you just continue to move forward using what you've already learned. And then you're able to estimate portions of foods so that you know, and based on what you've learned, you're able to understand an estimate of your calorie intake or other types of things that you might be tracking. And therefore you don't have to track it all the time. And then finally, I would say I do recommend at least a few apps, but there are a lot of them out there. I like My Net Diary. That's probably my favorite. I like their interface and it's very comprehensive. It's very user-friendly. I also like MyFitnessPal and I like Lose It, but there are a lot of other ones out there. And generally they have a basic package, which gives you very basic information, but a lot of times it's helpful to upgrade to the premium package and you get a lot more functionality. There is a cost for that. And usually there's a minor cost for the app as well. But for some people, it's very well worth it.
Okay, thank you.
Hmm?
All right, a few webinars ago, you gave us very specific recommendations on what category of foods to eat at every meal and how much proteins, grains, fats, vegetables, fruits, etc. And that's been extremely helpful. Would you please give us your assessment of the MIND diet and how it fits with your recommendations? Specifically, if the secondary sources about the MIND diet I am reading are correct, cheese should be limited to 1 serving per week and should be a soft cheese. You've recommended dairy as one category of protein that can be selected for 3 meals per day.
Okay, so the question, maybe what I'll do is repeat the question too, or repeat my understanding of it. The question is about the MIND diet. And for those who don't know, MIND stands for the Mediterranean -DASH diet, intervention for neurodegenerative delay. It is a diet that essentially helps reduce your risk for cognitive decline or dementia. And it's generally understood that any foods that would be good for your heart and your arteries would also be good for your brain. And so a lot of the foods on the Mediterranean and the DASH diets are considered heart healthy, and therefore they are also considered healthy for your brain and for your cognitive functioning. So the question is, would you please give us your assessment of the MIND diet? I like the MIND diet in the sense that I think it's a legitimate dietary approach to healthy eating. It's diverse, so it's not necessarily a template. It kind of gives good choices from which to choose. And I think it's a sustainable type of eating pattern because it offers a variety of choices and it's not too restrictive. And then specifically the question was if this person was researching secondary sources about the MIND diet and it came across the recommendation to limit cheese to 1 serving per week and have it specifically be a soft cheese. So my understanding of the MIND diet is that cheese is limited because it is high in saturated fat, which is conventionally known to increase risk for heart disease or blocked arteries or plaque in the arteries or high calcium scores, for instance, on a calcium test. And it is also associated with inflammation. So because cheese is high in saturated fat, and 1 ounce of regular cheese has about 6 grams of saturated fat, which for most of us is close to about half of what we would want to be eating in any one given day. And this is, of course, presuming that you're starting from a healthy weight, and are generally healthy. But where I was going with this is, because high fat cheese is in the high saturated fat category, it falls into the limit section of the MIND diet. And I guess what I would say is the MIND diet, as far as I'm aware, I couldn't find information that it specified soft cheese. However, I believe soft cheese, I think the rationale there is because it's higher in moisture, it may be lower, just inherently lower in saturated fat. So soft cheeses might naturally be lower in saturated fat. And so then what I would say is I'm still okay with more than 1 serving per week of dairy or cheese if it's lower in saturated fat, potentially. That means it's low fat or just inherently is lower in saturated fat, like a soft cheese or like a Swiss cheese. Or if it's like a part skim, I think I mentioned the low fat. So I think I typically recommend like a Greek yogurt or cottage cheese or cheese. I'm okay with some regular cow's milk as well. And I don't generally, for someone who's generally healthy, does not have NTM lung disease, an optimal diet might have, say, up to 2 servings of dairy in it per day, which is quite a lot. That's not quite as much as 3, which was mentioned in the question. But I prefer the lower fat dairy and probably 2 servings a day. But my caveat here is that if you are not starting from a very healthy position, meaning say you're underweight or you're very ill and you're weak, I think I tend to relax my recommendations. And I don't think that in that situation, your priority necessarily needs to be following a strict MIND diet. But if you're starting from a very healthy place, maybe you have very mild bronchiectasis or mild NTM lung disease, and it doesn't really profoundly affect you, then this might be a reasonable thing to follow.
Okay.
Hopefully, yeah, I think that got it. It was long.
Thank you. That was a good explanation. I wasn't even sure what the MIND diet was, so that's helpful. Can you recommend a few truly healthy cookbooks or websites with recipes that are relatively simple? So many are fad or personality based or have recipes that require a long time to prepare and or expensive or difficult to find ingredients.
Yeah, so the question is about good cookbooks or websites. And ironically, I don't have like an easy answer to this question, because what I find is that every cookbook has good recipes in it, but I have not found a single cookbook that is that has so many good recipes in it that I use it exclusively. So I usually find that, maybe I can re-say it this way, every cookbook has some good recipes, but every cookbook has a lot of ones that I don't like. So my approach to finding good recipes is sharing with friends and family. And that's one. So I've collected recipes over the years, and I still do. I also experiment a lot with my foods, then I develop my own recipes. But probably the most popular way of finding recipes now, in my opinion, is by using blogs. And what a blog is just basically someone who's publishing recipes on their website. And the way you do that, very simply, is by searching a recipe that you want or that you think you might want, and then looking for recipes that are, of a similar title of what you've searched, and look for ones with high marks or close to 5 stars. So you want a recipe that has been reviewed by a lot of people. I think I forgot to mention that. So a lot of reviews and a lot of high marks or many stars, close to 5, that is. So that's how I get my sources. I also like, I look at magazines when I'm in the shopping aisle or at a bookstore or in someone's house or waiting at the doctor's office. Like, I actually flip through magazines and I'll take pictures of recipes. I really like eating well. I like cooking light. I love fine cooking. I like America's Test Kitchen. What are some other? There's a lot of good ones. And again, similarly with books, magazines have a lot of good recipes, and then they also have a lot of not good recipes. Oh, I also really like Diabetes Forecast. Oddly enough, I find just regular good recipes in there. And what else was I going to say? I was also going to say I really like the Instant Pot, not for everything, but there is such a big, Instant Pot is a pressure cooker. It has such a big following online that a lot of people have posted recipes. So Instant Pot recipes online are highly reviewed by a lot of people, and there are a lot of them that have 5 stars. So I actually encourage people to consider doing that, because that can be, Instant Pot cooking can be easier than cooking from scratch, in the sense that usually there are fewer ingredients that you put into a pot and then you turn it on and seal it, and it's hands-free cooking. So I find that to be really convenient, and I like it. I like it for all my whole grains. I like it for my beans. I like it for chicken. And I like it for certain one-pot meals. I hope that was helpful. That's a really hard question. I wish I had one cookbook that I loved, but I think that's a hard proposition.
It is. There are a lot of sources for.
Oh, and you know what? I was going to actually throw that out to the crowd. If anyone has, I would love to know if anyone has like one cookbook that they really like. I'm interested for myself, so I'd love you to share with me, and then maybe others could benefit as well. So if you want to drop that in the chat, and maybe we all could benefit.
Drop that into the Q&A, and I will read that out. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Great. Next question is, I'd like to know more about foods known to strengthen the immune system and those that are anti-inflammatory for a person with bronchiectasis and some COPD and some COPD. Are there foods to avoid that may be more inflammatory? What about turmeric or others? I will say before you answer this, I will say we have had a webinar previously on nutrition and immunity, which you can check out on our YouTube channel. But Michelle, we'd like to hear if you have some other specific thoughts.
Right. Okay. So thank you, Amy. I was also going to say that too. There is the nutrition and immunity webinar, and there's the nutrition or anti-inflammatory diet webinar. I think both of those are good, so they would have more information. So the question is essentially, so I'm trying to think if I have anything else to add, more about foods known to strengthen the immune system and those that are an anti-inflammatory. So let me maybe make a global statement here. Again, as this relates to people who are lower body weight, because there are a number of questions about body weight. In the case of someone who is more moderately or severely affected by bronchiectasis or NTM lung disease, I would argue that if you're underweight in a setting like that, where you have a chronic inflammatory conditions, I would argue that globally, underweight or malnutrition, whether it's mild to severe, is an inflammatory condition in and of itself. And what I mean by that is, if you are not meeting your needs and your body is wanting for energy or calories or nutrients, and in the worst cases, if you are physically starving, because I see that unfortunately more often than I would like, but I would argue that restricting or not giving your body what it needs is a stressor. And to some degree, it's inflammatory. So globally, I want you to eat enough so that you're not in a state of undernutrition or inadequate intake for your needs, which are higher with these chronic inflammatory states. So keep that in mind. In other words, what's the expression? Don't lose the forest for the trees, or something like, don't just focus on one thing like turmeric or added sugar, or don't lose sight of the fact that the bigger picture is that you just eat a well-balanced, nutrient-rich diet that meets your increased needs with these conditions. Because if you're not, then you're stressing your body and your immune system is screaming for help and you're not fueling it. So I think that's probably the biggest perspective that I want to add. The specifics really are in those websites. I actually did go to pretty great detail in terms of the foods that might be good. And that would answer the question about strengthening the immune system as well as anti-inflammatory. But what's new here with this question is the turmeric. And I printed out some information from the natural products database that I have access to. I think it's something that healthcare providers who work at institutions that maintain subscriptions to these big databases have access to, but I don't know that the general public has as much access to as much detailed information as say a healthcare provider might in one of these settings. So I do, at National Jewish, I do have access to some great scientifically based databases. And one of them is the natural products database. And so I thought I could use this question and target turmeric because it's such a popular supplement that I see that, and I personally want to know a little bit more about it myself. So I brought some information to share on turmeric. And if it's okay, I'm just going to read a little bit because it's fun to share. And this was a little bit new for me too. So I looked up turmeric, and the common names are actually, you might have heard of curcumin. So you'll see those terms used a little bit interchangeably. And the bottom line is that there is some evidence, although it is limited, from meta-analyses that suggests that curcumin, and they say that curcumin is the most commonly studied constituent of turmeric, and or curcuminoids. So these are other studied constituents, and I would say biologically active constituents of turmeric, that the curcumin and the curcuminoids have analgesic, which is pain relieving, anti-inflammatory, which is lowering inflammation, and antioxidant effects. And they say, so there's limited evidence for those effects. And there's also limited evidence that these compounds may improve biomarkers like C-reactive protein, high sensitivity CRP, or ESR, which is the erythrocyte sedimentation rate. So those are two common biomarkers, but there's a lot of other ones that we use in a clinical setting. So what they're saying is there is limited evidence that there is anti-inflammatory effects measured by biomarkers or symptoms. And it's in these patient groups in which the curcumin-like compounds have been studied. Patients with osteoarthritis, major depression, cardiovascular risk, obesity, and metabolic syndrome. So it seems, so that excludes bronchiectasis and NTM-LD. However, we're not surprised. It's not like we expect a lot of studies, all the studies have been done in, these populations that you're in. But then they also go on, but the fact that there is evidence that there are anti-inflammatory effects, I think is promising. And you can extrapolate then. You could say probably for people with inflammatory conditions, there may be benefit. And I use the word may. They also go on to say that data are equivocal, meaning maybe, I think that means, uncertain in dysglycemic or diabetic populations. And then they're insufficient in other populations. So these are the populations that have actually been studied. Chronic pruritic skin lesions, cognitive decline, inflammatory bowel disease, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, psoriasis and uveitis, which I think is an inflammation of the eye, something, maybe that's pink eye. Anyway, so in summary, it sounds like there is limited data that suggests that in patients with osteoarthritis, major depression, cardiovascular risk, obesity, metabolic syndrome, these curcumin-like compounds may have anti-inflammatory effects. And I'll go on a little bit more. I will say that there's a contraindication that may apply to some people. Turmeric should not be used in patients or people with gallstones or bile duct or passage obstruction. And they don't give the rationale for that, but I see a lot of people with those issues. So I want to say that because a lot of people are on turmeric, but probably don't realize that's the contraindication. And then they also give the dosing. So the dosing for curcuminoid or curcumin is 200 milligrams a day to up to 6 grams a day with treatment durations of up to 8 months. So those are the study conditions. And then I wanted to read that. Actually, I thought this was interesting, a little perspective. So turmeric and its natural, this is a little history. Turmeric and its natural curcuminoids have been used medicinally for centuries in various parts of the world. In the traditional Ayurvedic medical system, turmeric is a well-recognized treatment for numerous respiratory conditions, such as asthma, bronchial hyperactivity, allergies, also liver disorders, anorexia, which is loss of appetite, rheumatism, diabetic wounds, cough, and sinusitis. It says that in the Indian subcontinent, turmeric is valued for its wound healing properties. In traditional Chinese medicine, turmeric is used to treat conditions that cause abdominal pain. And due to its anti-inflammatory activity, turmeric was used to treat sprains and swelling in ancient Hindu medicine, to give us some perspective on this. And then I also wanted to read the section on anti-inflammatory effects, just to highlight that again. We understand the metabolic pathways that curcumin interferes with, meaning the inflammatory pathways that curcumin can interfere with and mitigate or improve. So I thought this was interesting. In animal data, they say regarding anti-inflammatory effects specifically, in a study in rats, the therapeutic effect of curcumin was comparable to that of hydrocortisone, which is like steroid treatment, in treating experimental pulmonary fibrosis. That's in rats. And then there's a few other paragraphs, which I just think are interesting. They've also looked at clinical trials, have compared curcumin with a specific non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug called phenylbutazone, which I don't recognize, but it's an NSAID basically. And they used in hemodialysis patients, which probably doesn't apply to anyone here, but again, we're extrapolating from the data. So they used 1,500 milligrams of turmeric, and that dose was associated with better improvements from baseline, meaning improvement from baseline in several anti-inflammatory markers compared with placebo. So they saw reductions in symptoms as well as C-reactive protein after 8 weeks. So the dose, 1,500 milligrams a day after 8 weeks. And they also saw reductions in other inflammatory factors, such as interleukin-6, tumor necrosis factor alpha, and high sensitivity CRP were observed in a second study after 12 weeks. So those are all known inflammatory biomarkers that appear to have improved. They go on to say, let's see, what was this? This was someone who had removed, okay, so then there were studies in that removed with people who had removed molars. So they had issues in their mouth, and they compared local delivery of turmeric. It was not significantly different from chlorhexidine, which is the gold standard in periodontics. So it apparently improved inflamed gingival tissues and had some other improvements in the mouth. So again, some limited evidence there. And then finally, they looked at a meta-analysis that, let's see, they looked at a curcuminoid preparation for 4 weeks. Dosages ranged from 200 milligrams a day to 6 grams a day. And what happened? They again found a dose let's see, they found beneficial effects of the curcuminoids on IL-6 concentrations. That's an inflammatory biomarker. Study populations involved patients with osteoarthritis, oral lichen planus, obesity, type 2 diabetes, metabolic syndrome, sulfur mustard intoxication, and chronic pruritic skin lesions. So overall, they say the curcuminoids significantly reduced these inflammatory biomarkers such as IL-6 compared to placebo. And it was an 8 weeks with the dosages ranging between 200 milligrams to 6 grams a day. So that was a long thing. But when I look at supplements, I kind of want this information because do we have evidence that it helps a lot of respiratory patients? There's not a ton of evidence, but could we extrapolate? Well, maybe we could. So then the next step in this process is to say, because I'm not huge on a ton of supplements, I have to admit, but if you're interested in taking a supplement, at least understand what the rationale is. In other words, is there a mechanism that someone can point to that we can understand? And apparently there is with this. We understand the inflammatory pathway that curcumin interferes with. Find out what the dose is and what the duration of treatment is. And then lastly, and most importantly, find a supplement that has been third-party certified. And Consumer Lab, if I can, let me see if I can skip over to my computer. Let's see if I can do this. Here we go. I think I may have this open because I think there were 3 that I was going to give out. If I can just quickly get to it, which I think I can. Yeah, here we go. So the problem with supplements, in my opinion, is that they're largely under-regulated. So unless they have been certified, you cannot be sure that there are not heavy metals in there, that there are not other toxins in there. You can't be sure that they contain what they say they contain in the amount they say they contain it. And I think that's just a huge racket and unfortunate that there are over 100,000 supplements on the market and they just can't all be tested. So only a small percentage are, and I think you really should, if at all possible, stick to the ones that have been tested or stick to the ones that are made in labs that are big enough that you know they're good manufacturing, good manufacturing. What is that P stand for? You know what I'm getting at. It'll come to me. Practices, GMPs, that those are solid enough that you can trust those. And those are generally your big pharmaceutical companies or private companies that have kind of grown to be big like that and have that reputation. But back to Consumer Lab to kind of finish this loop here. Let me go to the, okay, so I'm scrolling. Okay, so they tested extracts, but I'm going to skip that. And by the way, if you want this information, you can pay like $55 a year for a subscription to consumerlab.com. And I don't get any kickbacks for this. I just find the information to be invaluable. But they evaluated extracts. I'm not going to go to those. I'm going to go specifically to, let's see, I'm scrolling. There are actually more extracts, I think, than I realized. Yeah, okay, so there's extract only. Okay, hold on. Here we go. Oh, this is root powder, because most people are taking a powder or a pill, I think, is what I see. I don't see a lot of extracts in practice. But in terms of a root powder, they did not approve a product distributed by BioSchwartz, and I never see that one, but it's obviously on the market. The ones they did approve, one was Garden of Life, My Kind Organics Extra Strength Turmeric, and there were 100 milligrams of curcuminoids in one tablet. So you can get to that 200 milligram dose. I wouldn't go on a high dose, especially if you want to start and see how you tolerate something. But that brand was approved, tested for heavy metals, tested for disintegration, was good. And then Nature's Bounty, which I see a lot of that in practice. So Nature's Bounty turmeric 450 milligrams was approved, and that one had 60.3 milligrams of curcuminoids per serving. So it wasn't as concentrated as the Garden of Life product I mentioned, but it's one as well. And then those, see, that's all. Those are the only two that I came up with in the root powder. So I don't know about the others. Now it's possible Nature Made or some of the other, that's a big company. They may have a turmeric that has been third-party certified by USP, which would be fine as well. But you can see that I see a lot of people on turmeric, and I don't see a lot of people on these brands. And if I were going to try this, I would talk to my doctor, make sure I didn't have a contraindication with the medication I was taking or a condition that I had, like the gallstones. And then I would try one that's been approved, and I would start at a low dose. That would be 200 milligrams, which was based on the trials. And then I would use it and try and determine whether or not my labs changed or my symptoms changed, and whether or not it was doing any harm otherwise. And that's a long answer, but that is truly the process that I think people should go through when they're trying to pick supplements. And unfortunately, I don't think people, I would personally like people to be more rigorous about judging the supplements that they choose to invite into their body system. So that was a long answer, but I hope it was helpful.
That was great. A lot of people have questions about turmeric, and a lot of people are interested in it. So I think that was probably very helpful for them.
Yeah.
So next question is about yeast. I am wondering about nutritional yeast. It has been a staple in our diet, great source of B vitamins, not to mention nutty cheese taste. I did not know that about the B vitamins. I add it to soups, salads, pastas, etc. Now I am wondering if it could hang around in the throat or digestive tract and provide a breeding ground for mycobacteria. Would you know, or is there a way to research this? I haven't been able to find any answers myself.
I know. And so my answer is I don't know of any research on this. And my initial reaction when I read this question, and the question basically is, okay, this person likes nutritional yeast. I have to admit, I like nutritional yeast too. I don't use it a lot, but I do really like it on popcorn. So I'll do just, you can air pop your popcorn, and then you can put some like Bragg's amino acid on there, just a little bit of salt, and then the nutritional yeast I think is delicious. So that's a fun snack idea. But what I got out of this was I don't think, or my reaction, and this is just my educated guess, is that nutritional yeast isn't going to be any more likely to hang out in your throat or digestive tract and be a breeding ground any more than anything else that you would eat that would be nutrient dense or nutrient rich. So I don't see it as any different than the food you're eating. Now, if you use so much nutritional yeast that you feel like there's actually a residue in your throat, that might be a different story. But otherwise, I'm not concerned about it. And I do think it is a healthy way to add more nutrients to your diet.
Okay. Great.
Shorter answer this time.
No, that's good. Here's another question that I think is probably a little bit also a little more complex. We know the classic profile of the patient, older and slender. Is there really a need to put on weight? Most people, when they add weight, they add it in the abdominal area, which is not necessarily helpful. What is the reasoning? Is it strictly to beef up in case they need to go on antibiotics and all the challenges that they bring sometimes? Also, this idea of the burden of disease, can you explain it further? Before you answer, Michelle, I'll just comment on the burden of disease. Disease burden is the impact of a health problem as measured by a financial cost, mortality, morbidity, or other indicators. And I think in this context, they're probably looking at morbidity and mortality.
Okay. Yeah, I actually, thank you, Amy. I was actually wondering, I wanted clarification on the burden of disease. So basically it's like, does it apply? Does being older and slender potentially increase morbidity or mortality is essentially the question, as I understand it. And so let me try and unpack this, because this is something I get asked almost every day. So a lot of people with bronchiectasis and NTM lung disease, a lot of them are women, not all of them, but most of the people I see are women, and they are older and they are slender. And a lot of times I hear people say, I've always been thin. So then the question becomes, is it really necessary for me to put on weight? I've always been this weight, is what I hear. And or other family members are like me, etc. And so I think you have to consider what your current health status is. So, and again, I often go back to my approximately three categories. Are you mildly ill? Are you like, do you have a mild case? And I can't necessarily tell you this. Your doctor could tell you this, but I determine mild by how profoundly affected you are by the disease. If you're mildly affected, it means you are living mostly your normal best life, but you have to manage things, respiratory therapy, maybe antibiotics on occasion. You're vigilant about trying to keep up your health, but in general, you feel pretty good and you live your life as you always have. In that case, if you're older and slender, what I'm probably going to say to you is, if you can, be aware that you might be at risk for involuntary weight loss because of the disease itself or the side effects of the medications. And be very vigilant about maintaining the weight that you are. I will also probably say, if you're willing, could you aim to be a weight that is a little bit on the higher end of your normal? If you've always been thin, I'm sure you have like a plus or minus 5 pounds, maybe 10 pounds. Can you aim for the higher end? Because the rationale is it may be protective in the future if you get sick. And it could be from NTM or another bug, or God forbid, COVID. Although COVID, hopefully for most of us now is pretty tame or manageable, but pneumonia or just any nasty thing that might be out there. Because sickness usually comes with some kind of depletion and is obviously, or is commonly associated with weight loss. So it's a protective mechanism. And I encourage people to think of any extra weight that often does go on around the belly first as like a reserve. Think of it as weight reserves, not weight gain. Think of it as a cushion that's protective for you, protective pad. And the thinking there, and to extend this a little bit, if anyone gets sick, even if you don't have bronchiectasis or NTMLD, your body goes into fight mode and it starts to burn through nutrients in fighting whatever it is you're fighting. And so you want it to be replete and you want it to have reserves of nutrients when it needs it. And that's what that reserve is there for. It's for your own immune system. And honestly, it's also for your brain to keep you alert and for your body to give you energy to like just cope with the sickness. So I like to frame it like that. Now, if you're older and slender and you have more moderate to, in the worst case scenario, severe disease, then I would argue you are at a disadvantage because your body is likely not getting what it needs to keep up this fight. And so it becomes more imperative, and in some people essential, that they get more in order to have a stronger immune response that will aid the antibiotics. Antibiotics can't fix you in and of themselves. You need your own immune system to step up and show up. And that's what those reserves are there for. And then the antibiotics are there to assist your immune system. So you need that first line of defense, which is what you have in your own body, to be really robust. And then the antibiotics should help get on board and really finish the job. So I hope, let's see. So I would argue, depending on your situation, a little heavier for everyone, heavier in the normal range is good. And then certainly restoring weight if you have more moderate or severe disease, or even putting on a little bit more so you have more protection is helpful. And specifically, so I hope that answers the first part in terms of, is there really a need to put on weight? Secondly, about the burden of disease, there is data that shows that people with NTM lung disease, when their body mass index is lower than 18.5, they have greater mortality and morbidity, or complications, and or less response to antibiotic treatment. So I think you could definitely make the case there that there is a connection between nutritional status, as in this case measured by BMI, and your longer term outcomes with a disease.
Thank you. And Michelle, I also wanted to say that it's not just in NTM populations. There have been studies, numerous studies of various populations that have looked at various populations of older patients or older people, even not just patients, and they have seen an increased risk of mortality in patients who are underweight versus people who are normal weight or even somewhat overweight.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, and there was a study published, I think it was more than 10 years ago, but since then there have been a number of other studies looking at other populations of people, and they're all finding that same thing. So, that burden of disease kind of in this case refers to that increased mortality being associated with the decreased BMI.
Yeah, and I guess I'll put on another addendum there, and that is sometimes we don't know what comes first. Like, are people thinner because they're sicker? So the disease caused some of that depletion, or did the thinness predispose to the illness? And so it may be hard to tease out what is the chicken and what is the egg. However, I think you could easily argue both, meaning the thinness, there are theories that connect slenderness and that body habitus to an increased risk for NTM-LD, and maybe some people think that's more controversial, but you can make that argument that there seems to be predisposition. You could also make the argument that the disease is probably causing more depletion and lower body weight, and therefore it might just be a reflection that those people are sicker. And that's true with NTM-LD, and then as well as the studies that I think Amy is referring to as well.
Next question. I've watched your presentations on gaining weight and had a phone conference with a diet specialist with the Leukemia Society because I also have CLL, which is chronic lymphocytic leukemia, I believe. But I have still not been able to gain the 7 pounds I lost in November when I had an exacerbation. I'm eating more the last few months, but not gaining. Any advice is appreciated.
Yeah, so let me say, number one, it may just take you a long period of time to finally get on top, or get on top of your recovery, meaning your exacerbation may have depleted you to the point where it's going to take you a while to fill in the deficit that you acquired during that exacerbation. And once you do that, then your body's going to start to rebuild and you'll see weight restoration. It could take a while. I know you said the last few months, so I don't know what time frame that is, but it could take longer than that. So you may need to just be persistent, keep up the efforts until you start to see progress. On the other hand, I do counsel people who really struggle and have serious difficulty gaining weight, even with their best efforts. And usually those are the people who have more advanced disease, has been my observation. And that becomes a very challenging case. But what I would say is try and find more ways. So first of all, you may have to do something different. Although I did say you just need to keep doing what you're doing and see if that pans out. If it doesn't, you may need to make a change. And so you have to think about what other ways you can add something to your diet without taking anything else away, or concentrate calories in your diet. And I honestly find the concentrate strategy to be a little more manageable, because adding just means big volumes, and those really are just not that tolerable for a lot of people. Concentrating means you are taking things out, like a lot of just plain water, or unsweet coffee, tea, or I saw a woman today drinking a lot of green tea. Her BMI was 14. And so you have to weigh the cost of any low calorie item that you're eating. If you think, for instance, green tea is really beneficial, I won't dispute that. But if it's getting in the way of if it's reducing your capacity to eat or drink more calories, then it is a problem. And you need to start substituting. And you need to go through your diet with a fine-tooth comb and don't leave any stone untouched. Find everything that is lower calorie and try and flip it to be more concentrated. That's generally one of the approaches where I start with. And sometimes that means using a nutritional supplement. Having said that, I have people who try that and then they end up with worse reflux, or it's still just not enough. So I can appreciate that this is really, really hard for some people. And I don't know your specific, I don't know if this is specific enough to you, but I do think there are opportunities in most people's diets to do this, to do some replacements. And then I think you have to be very consistent, meaning you have to do it most days of the week. A lot of kind of the fatal flaw in a lot of people's strategy is that they're good on a few days, but then not so good on most of the rest of the days. And you can really get behind the 8 ball or go back into a deficit if you can't keep the efforts up consistently. And on some days, if you don't feel well or are too busy, you may just have to resort to bars or shakes or something to get you through if you can't rely on your normal diet and foods that you would eat. But don't let a day go by where you're not maximizing everything that you can get in. So this is a longer topic, but that's kind of my general answer for now.
Thank you. Next question. I know you've spoken about sugar and NTM and bronchiectasis and weight, needing to gain it, but I just want to get an idea of how much is acceptable and not causing more damage to our lungs. I'm very underweight, and the only way I'm able to gain is with some intake of sugar, and I feel torn about it because of sugar's reputation of harm to our bodies.
Right, that's understandable. I get this a lot as well. And my knee-jerk reaction is, I'm concerned that you're underweight, and I want you to let go of some of your prohibitions about sugar. I also want you to let go of any prohibitions you may have about fat. But truly, and I mentioned this earlier, globally, underweight may be your bigger threat compared to sugar. If your body is not getting what it needs in the face of your increased needs with your conditions, then that is a stressor, an inflammatory stressor in and of itself. And so you primarily just need to get enough in, no matter what way works for you. And you just told me that the best way for you, or one of the better ways for you, is by intake of sugar. So I'm going to give you the green light on that. Having said that, I know that that can be hard. So sometimes it is helpful to have some guidelines. And the general guidelines are 5 to 10% of your calories can be from added sugars. So on a 2,000 calorie diet, and you may need more than 2,000 calories, but let's stick with 2,000 for the time being, that translates into about 25 to 50 grams of added sugar per day. So go with a 50 just for a minute. 50 grams of added sugar is actually quite a lot. That doesn't mean carbohydrate. It means sugar that's been added to a food, say like if you're going to eat ice cream, or if you're eating sweets, that actually gives you a decent budget. So what I'm trying to suggest is that you have a budget, and I want you to use it. And keep in mind that 5 to 10% is a pretty restrictive guideline, and it's for people who do not have bronchiectasis and NTMLD, and it's also for people who are generally carrying extra weight, and sugar becomes more problematic in people who are carrying extra weight and are not able to process it well or dispose it out of their bloodstream, which probably doesn't apply to you at your current weight. So I just suggested that the situation in which sugar might be harmful to someone's health is not a situation in which you find yourself presently. So it is likely to be less harmful for you, and the benefits probably outweigh the costs.
Thank you.
I hope that helps. Yeah.
I think that's probably very helpful for her. Yeah. Next one, the more I try to eat, the more I seem to poop. Hence, I'm not gaining weight and I need to. I'm not sure if that's a common problem.
I know, I smiled when I read this question. So to some degree, it is completely normal that the more you eat, the more you will poop. Having said that, a lot of times I see people with more frequent bowel movements, or softer or waterier or runnier or whatever, or just different consistency, that there is a cause for concern for some degree of malabsorption. Meaning, if you have too frequent stools, or if they're of a consistency that seems like you're not digesting the food that you ate, then there may be reason for concern that you're malabsorbing and you're not able to then gain weight because the nutrients are being malabsorbed. If you suspect that to be the case, then it's completely reasonable to try and manage that without hopefully then causing the opposite problem, which is constipation. But this is a tricky balance, and I don't think there's a bulletproof approach here. But what you can do is you can modify your diet so that it is lower in the insoluble fiber that might cause you to have more frequent bowel movements. I generally think of non-starchy vegetables in that category that would promote motility, or like especially whole grain wheat. That's going to promote motility, whole wheat products, that is. Anything that's really high in fiber. You can do that. You can also try and decrease things like sugar alcohols that might cause diarrhea, or decrease really high fat or greasy foods, anything that seems to be a trigger food for you. So you can follow and then, you can also increase foods that might be more constipating, whether that be, people know of the brat diet. So foods that are higher in soluble fiber, which tend to form a more bulky stool, bananas, rice, I think applesauce is the diet. What else? I mean,
applesauce toast.
Yeah.
Bread.
Yeah. And what else was I going to say? You can also do things like, there's so many different tips that you could play with. You could also try a fiber supplement like Banatrol. Actually, that's a banana fiber, or something similar. You could try and do things like eat regularly, believe it or not, because if you go too long without eating, that can actually kick in peristalsis and make bowel movement more urgent after eating. So more regular eating allows your bowel to get into that habit without going quiet and then kicking in. You can do things like avoiding hot water in the morning, which in some people stimulates bowel movement. So there are and avoiding caffeine, other irritants. So there are things to try. And I think you have to kind of make a judgment for yourself, or talk to your doctor about whether or not this is an issue you want to try and manage.
Okay, thank you. Since some NTM patients have so much inflammation, what is your opinion of an anti-inflammation diet if you can manage to get enough calories? In other words, no sugar, no eggs, no gluten, no alcohol, no caffeine.
Yeah, so, okay. So the question is essentially, what's my opinion of an anti-inflammatory diet? And in general, I do believe in the concept in the sense that there are foods that have been shown to lower inflammatory biomarkers in our bodies, like the CRP or the ESR. I mentioned IL-6 and tumor necrosis factor alpha and some other ones. But foods, there is evidence that foods will lower these markers. What we believe right now is that that probably lowers the risk of chronic low-grade inflammation, which might lead to diseases like dementia, cancer, heart disease, metabolic syndrome. I would put diabetes in there, even though I think I said that wasn't the case up above, but typical diseases of the Western world. So that NTM and bronchiectasis aren't necessarily lumped into that category. Having said that, so where my yes, I just lost my train of thought. So I do believe in the concept of an anti-inflammatory diet. I don't necessarily think there's a big impact for people who have bronchiectasis and NTM, meaning I don't think there's a big impact that targets your lung disease. From my perspective, what's causing inflammation in people with bronchiectasis and NTM lung disease is the bacteria and the inflammation in the lung itself. And so diet may have a minimal impact just by extrapolation. It seems to help these other conditions, and we know the biomarkers of inflammation go down. But what we really need to do is, in most cases, attack the root cause, which often is a bacteria. Not always, but often. Or remove the problematic secretions in our lungs by using respiratory therapy. So I see those interventions as being more anti-inflammatory than diet per se. I'm not saying diet doesn't have an impact. I just think it's more minimal. And then, right, if you can manage to get enough calories. Okay, so I think my other comment in this question is, you mentioned that an anti-inflammation diet would contain no sugar, no eggs, no gluten, no alcohol, and no caffeine. However, in referencing my anti-inflammatory diet presentation, I would argue that an anti-inflammatory diet would be low in added sugars, not necessarily no sugar. I think that's too general of a statement, but lower in added sugars, and we just discussed that point. Eggs are controversial, so I don't say no eggs on an anti-inflammatory diet. Other sources might. There's a lot of conflicting information out there. I'm okay with some eggs. I'm also okay with gluten, particularly whole grains. They are included in an anti-inflammatory diet, including whole wheat. Of course, if you actually have a gluten-sensitive enteropathy like celiac disease, gluten would be a problem for you, or an intolerance for that matter. And then alcohol, I don't say that no alcohol is included on an anti-inflammatory diet. I would say alcohol or wine specifically in moderation is okay. And then caffeine, I wouldn't say that's bad necessarily either. What's been shown is that some caffeinated beverages, particularly coffee and tea, do contain a lot of phenolic compounds or antioxidant compounds that are actually anti-inflammatory. So I would say potentially some caffeinated beverages are okay. So I wanted to make that distinction. There is a lot of conflicting information out there. I'm going to acknowledge that. I'm just going to put forward what I believe to be the best based on what I know now.
Thank you. Are there any specific nutritional recommendations for someone having lung surgery for NTM in the near future?
So yes, specifically, I would say go into surgery replete, which means you are filled or well supplied. It means you are packed full of nutrients. You don't want your calories or your nutrients to be in a dive before surgery. You want to be like a little bit on the overfilled side. So I'm okay with a little bit of extra weight, which means you don't want to lose weight. And if you have a little bit of extra weight, I think you're better protected. And eat a nutrient-rich diet, as well as take an appropriate supplement. I generally think a multivitamin is completely sensible in anyone who has increased needs like NTM or bronchiectasis. So that's what I would say. Enjoy eating and make sure you're as strong as possible, and maybe have a little extra, because you're probably going to lose a little bit of weight just through the process of being NPO, or nothing by mouth. And your body's going to be it's going to have higher needs in recovery period. So you want those nutrients to be right ready and waiting for when it needs to recover from the surgical process.
Great. Next one, I am interested in hydration products or food products that help the inflammation in the lungs of NTM patients. The need to keep the mucus runny for easier expulsion is a challenge. The cycle that MAC creates of inflammation in the lungs that produces additional mucus that clogs airways that needs removal is endless. It's amazing our lungs survive in this endless assault and battle cycle.
Yeah, I actually like how you put that. So, I mean, what I got from that question is that you feel as though you have so much mucus to clear from your lungs, and it's just a constant ritual that you need to do. And so you're interested in any beverages, hydration products, or food products, that help with the inflammation and help keep the mucus, I think, thin. And so I actually don't have great specifics on this. I don't know of few foods that are inherently mucolytic or that break up mucus other than just enough fluid, say, per se. I know there's information about that in terms of supplements and foods, but I did not have enough time to research each one. And I'm not aware, I personally don't know of any. So I don't have any off the top of my head. I didn't see any that grabbed me when I looked. That doesn't mean there aren't any, but what I wanted to emphasize here was that respiratory therapy and using the mucolytics that we're aware of, whether that be hypertonic saline, and using your nebulizer, the actual mechanical treatments with your vest and your respiratory therapy, I think are the cornerstone of airway clearance and getting rid of that mucus. So I would put the emphasis there. And then in terms of reducing inflammation in your lungs, I think to some degree we've addressed that from a global sense, and my other presentations give some more of the details on that. And then we also address the turmeric possibility too. So I don't have a lot of additional information to add on that one at this time.
Okay. Since 80% of MAC patients have some form of GERD, can you touch on food habits to help with the healthy sleep cycle?
Yeah, I was wondering what the person was getting at with this. GERD, which is gastroesophageal reflux disease, which is essentially complications from the backflow of material that from your stomach or esophagus that might get into your lungs and cause complications like lung disease. That condition in general, there are some lifestyle tips that help minimize reflux events. And one of which is just to avoid drinking all fluid and avoid eating all food within, say, 3 hours of bedtime. So that would be the best sleep habit. Try not to drink anything or eat anything prior to bed. If you have to eat or drink something, say to take your medication or potentially to moisten your throat, keep it minimal. Some sips of water or a swish in your mouth for moistening, and very minimal, if any, food. Other sleep habits, we generally talk about sleeping with the head of your bed elevated to 30 or 45 degrees. And what we're trying to do is elevate your body from your hips to your shoulders. And we want you to stay elevated, if at all possible, during the night rather than sliding or slouching. So try and orient your legs, maybe also elevated a little bit, so you're kind of wedged into the upright position, or have some other kind of anchor that keeps you higher up. Some people tell me they sleep in their recliner. Other people tell me that they actually do, they stack the pillows and they stay that way. So that is a possibility. Adjustable beds are helpful, as well as medical wedges. So head of bed elevated, not eating or drinking before bed, sleeping on your back side or your left side, prevent food from leaving your stomach and traveling upward. Sleeping on your stomach is not recommended, and neither is sleeping on your right side, because contents, particularly fluid from your stomach, easily flow out of your stomach when you're on your right side. So that's not recommended, to be clear. When you're on your stomach, obviously you're putting pressure on your stomach, which can promote upward movement or backflow or reflux, which is not recommended either. I think those are the main sleep habits. I'm hoping that's what you were getting at.
Yeah, and I also wanted to mention, we've mentioned our YouTube channel with our previous webinars. We have a previous webinar presentation from Devin Smith on healthy sleep habits, and we have a previous webinar presentation from Michelle on nutritional management of GERD. So please do go check those out as well.
Okay, thanks.
The next question is, the latest craze seems to be gut health and the endless products available that are going to solve all your problems by having good gut health. Can you do a little myth and truths of gut health?
Yeah, so this is another big topic that I honestly didn't have to delve in, that I didn't have time to research in depth. I have to admit that up front. Having said that, I do hope to do a webinar on probiotics, and maybe I can try and wrap some information on gut health in there after I've done a little bit more of my own homework. Having said that, I do believe, and I think it's pretty well accepted, that what you eat in terms of food in particular does change your gut microbiome. It influences it in a way that then influences your inflammation state, for one thing. So if you eat certain foods, you can promote the growth of certain bacteria that then will secrete certain inflammatory compounds or not. So I do think there is a link between healthy eating, and I would go back to the Mediterranean / DASH diet type of patterns, more plant-based, higher fiber, higher in prebiotics as well as potentially probiotics, that promote a healthy gut microbiome. So, let me see if I can find, trying to remember what exactly the question was. Oh, I think it was busting myths. Let me see, I don't have this one written down right on me, but.
The question, it was about busting myths. Hang on one second, let me call it. It was, let me read it to you again. Can you do a little myth and truths of gut health?
Yeah, so I think the truth is that microbiomes are incredibly complex, and they are affected by diet, and they can either promote health or possibly not promote health. I think that's true. Unfortunately, however, that truth then breeds, I think, a market of a lot of products, like you mentioned, that claim to either promote gut health or not. And so that's where you have to sift through and figure out what might be beneficial. Probiotics still have a very favorable, well, they're still controversial. I think that the American Gastroenterological Association actually just issued a statement recently that kind of said, well, we don't think they offer that much benefit. But I think on balance, I certainly think they might have more benefit than any potential harm. The harm might be just that a lot of them cost a lot of money. So So what would I say? I do think there's beneficial, I think eating a healthy diet promotes a healthy gut microbiome. I think probiotics may be beneficial. What else would I say? I honestly don't know all of the supplements that are peddled for gut health other than probiotics, but I'm sure there are a lot of them. So if there are specific questions about specific ones, please feel free to drop them in the Q&A and I'll see if I can address them either now or in that future webinar. But this is a tough question. You know, I think my stance has always been eat a healthy diet to promote a good gut microbiome and consider probiotics, particularly if you have any gut issues or are on a lot of oral antibiotics.
Are there any particular probiotics that you would recommend?
So, you know, so I think I have always felt that everyone's going to respond a little bit differently, but in general, I do like probiotics that have a variety of different strains and have a decent quantity or potency, which is probably more than 5 billion colony forming units per tablet, which is, I think, consistent with Gero. That's what one of their tablets is. And we will usually take two of those twice a day, which means you're up to 20 billion colony forming units, at least anyway. So is there one that I prefer? At National Jewish, many of you probably know we do recommend Gyrodophilus. We've had good clinical experience with that. So I do recommend that one. I've seen other people though need higher potency ones or other probiotics that have other strains. And in some cases I have recommended Visbiome, which I think is similar to VSL number 3. It's 450 billion colony forming units, which is like a prescription strength. I think they have one that's a little bit lesser than that. And then there's another variety of strains with that. So sometimes I will recommend people try that because I've had luck with it in some of the other gut health conditions that I treat, including IBS or SIBO, bacterial overgrowth. Or in some cases of more inflammatory conditions of the bowel. But hopefully I'll have more specifics, like I said, when I look at that topic a little bit more in depth. There's a lot of stuff to know and research out there, and I don't have a lot of this on the top of my mind right now.
Okay. Another question that was put into the Q&A, if you need to track macronutrients, do you have any suggestions?
You know, apps are probably best for that because they'll be able to do the calculations. I mean, the other way I do it, and the apps I referenced before were MyNet Diary, MyFitnessPal, and Lose It. But honestly, the way I do it is I just manually come up with a target calorie goal, and then take percentages of that. So let's say I want to be anywhere between 30 to maybe 55% of my calories from carbs. And then I do the percentage of the total calories, and you come up with calories from carbs, and then you can divide that by 4 calories per gram, which is the nutrient density of carb, and then you end up with the grams that you can count. I think those are easier, and so you don't necessarily have to count everything, but you can spot check your major sources of carbs or of protein or of fats per se. So I sometimes when I'm working with people, I'll just break it down manually and try and give them gram targets for the macronutrients. And then you don't necessarily have to track everything, but you can spot check the big foods that are going to have the most impact in those macronutrient categories.
Okay. You had asked for people to drop recommendations in, and we have 2. We have one is the Sonoma diet, written by Dr. Connie Gutterson, RD, PhD, in 2005, is derived from Mediterranean diet and has recommendations for changing this food style.
Okay, nice. Thank you.
That was one. And then another one is we have somebody saying, thank you for answering my question about inflammation and turmeric regarding cookbooks. I've appreciated the small, specifically themed healthy cook booklets published by CSPI Nutrition Action's Kate
Oh,
Sherwood.
that's interesting. Okay.
And they put an email address in there to reach them, healthycook@cspinet.org.
Oh, that's good. I'm familiar with Kate Sherwood, and I do think she has some good recipes. I haven't made a lot of them, but I think that's good. And I like
Okay.
the other one. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for the recommendations.
Mhm.
Next one, I am located in California. Do you offer one-to-one nutritional consultations or appointments via Zoom? If so, how do I go about scheduling it?
I do. So the answer is yes. I generally do virtual sessions either by FaceTime or Zoom. And you can actually contact me on my personal email. Amy, do you want me to drop that in the Q&A, or would you like to follow up with them maybe afterwards?
I am doing that right now.
Okay. Yeah, I'm looking for, oh, here we go. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll do that right now.
Okay.
And then next, how do you know if a supplement has been third-party tested?
Yeah. So usually there is a designation for the third-party certification on the front panel display. And the big third-party certifiers are USP, United States Pharmacopoeia. Nature Made is certified by USP, consumerlab.com, and NSF. I forget what that stands for. There are other ones though. I prefer the more reputable third-party certifiers, but you can look for more information on the third-party certifier online if they specify it on the front panel. If not, you can go dig around on the supplements website or ask questions of the supplement manufacturer and see what answer you'll get. If they don't have a third-party certifier, the stock answer is we have our own internal quality control department and we follow good manufacturing practices. And then you have to decide if you trust their internal reviews, which in some cases I think you can, especially the bigger manufacturers, but I do prefer the third-party certifiers.
I just wanted to go back to probiotics for a moment. You had mentioned Gyrodophilus, and there were other products that you named. You said VSL3 and Visbiome.
Yeah, I think, yeah, yes.
Somebody was asking for confirmation.
Okay. Yeah, I'll need to really look into that in more depth.
And then, do you happen to remember the brands of turmeric that you mentioned?
Yeah, so the doses that were tested in clinical trials were 200 milligrams of curcumin or curcuminoid substances, and then up to 6 grams per day. So the starting dose was 200 milligrams.
You remember the brand, any of the brands?
Oh, sorry, the brands. Yeah. The first one was Garden of Life, My Kind Organics Extra Strength Turmeric. It has 100 milligrams of curcuminoids per tablet, and it is a powder plus extract. And then the other one is Nature's Bounty Turmeric. In one capsule, there is 50 milligrams of turmeric extract, and 60 milligrams of curcuminoids per capsule. So it's not as concentrated as the Garden of Life, My Kind Organic Extra Strength. Yeah.
Is ginkgo biloba extract beneficial if you have NTM and insomnia?
I have no idea. That's enough. I don't know.
A good question.
Mm-hmm.
That might be something we'll have to look into for another sleep
No,
point. Question, if you have a hard time putting on weight, is it acceptable to do it with milkshakes, for example, rather than larger amounts of nutritious food?
So the answer is yes, for sure, especially if those go down easier. in general, we would want you to drink that milkshake with food that might absorb that fluid, if at all possible. If you can't do that, then at least try and stay upright. And try not try not bending over at your waist and putting pressure on your abdomen to promote the upward movement of the fluid from the milkshake that's in your stomach. But in general, the answer is yes.
Okay. How do you know if a probiotic is helping?
That's a good question. Sometimes you don't, in the sense that you're asymptomatic, which means it might be helping, and that's why you don't have any bad symptoms, such as diarrhea would be a common one. So if you are on it while on antibiotics and you don't have any antibiotic associated diarrhea or other GI upset, it may be working. It also may be working if you get on it and your symptoms resolve, meaning the diarrhea abates, or potentially the constipation abates, or the abdominal pain or bloating abates. So if you notice an improvement, and I have one of my GI doctors that I work with at National Jewish has said that you should try and be on a probiotic consistently for 30 days to assess its efficacy or effectiveness. So that's a commitment. So it may take a while for it to take effect.
Okay. Since I have to avoid citrus with GERD, is it important to take a vitamin C supplement, and how much, if so?
Oh yeah, so okay, so let me think about the specifics on this. So I would say you can get plenty of vitamin C from foods that are not citrus. In fact, in my immunity webinar, I went through some of the top sources of vitamin C, and bell peppers were high on the list, as well as some green vegetables like broccoli. But vitamin C is in a lot of vegetables too. And you may not need to take vitamin C in order to meet and or exceed the RDA for vitamin C, which is about 90 milligrams per day. You can also eat other fruit. So a lot of the other fruits, like your berries, strawberries in particular, are going to be really high in vitamin C, and those would be safe from a GERD perspective. So I don't think it's necessary to supplement with extra vitamin C. Having said that, I'm trying to remember what I said in the immunity talk. I think there is some data that shows that supplemental vitamin C might reduce the duration of a cold. And I'm trying to remember how much. I'd have to actually go back and look. Let me see if I can find that real quick.
They can also check out that webinar online.
Yeah, right. We're trying to get people to want more views. Yes, check out the webinar.
It's good to go back and revisit the webinars. They have good information in them.
Okay, I did actually find it. Let me see if I can.
Oh, good.
Yeah. If you want to wait here.
Yeah.
Okay, get rid of this. Okay, so I said, oh, if I could just read this. Okay, so yeah, here we go. So good sources: sweet red pepper, kiwi fruit, strawberries, sweet yellow pepper, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, and there's more information in the presentation. But you could consider supplementing with 200 to 300 milligrams per day, or up to 400 milligrams per day. This would be in addition to your diet. Just my tip there, though, and this might help potentially prevent the duration of a sickness that you have. The tip there, though, is don't take more than 250 milligrams at any one time, because your body essentially maxes out its absorption of the vitamin at that dose. So if you take a huge megadose, which many people are that I see, like 1,000 milligrams or more at a time, you're not absorbing or utilizing that.
Okay, good to know.
Okay.
What is an acceptable amount of carbs for weight gain?
An acceptable amount of carbs for weight gain?
Yes.
At the end? Well, that's an interesting question. I mean, If you don't have trouble with blood sugars, I honestly would say that I don't know that I would give limits, to be totally honest. I don't think it's necessary to give limits. Having said that, I can try and give ballpark. Let's say that 55% of your diet was carbohydrate, which is average. So actually, let's go higher. Let's go to 75. And 2,000 calorie diet. That's 375 grams of carb a day. It's a lot, but I think it's okay. Now, average would be 0.55 times 2,000, that by 4. So 275 to 375 would be on the high end of the range. I mean, we still want to leave room for other good proteins and fats. So I'm not going any higher than 75%. Which is pretty high.
We had a clarification on this. If you're pre-diabetic, what carb intake would you recommend?
Well, it depends on how underweight you are, because at some point your underweight becomes so much more important than the pre-diabetes. And this is true, that you should disregard the pre-diabetes. We could always treat that if we really needed to. And there are ways to spread out your carbs and combine carbs with proteins and fats so that you don't necessarily, load yourself up too much or get too much fast absorption at any one time. But if it's appropriate to consider some kind of a carb restriction, you could go 30 to 45% of your calories as carbs is lowish. You could go quite a bit lower than that, but let's do 30% as just to give a range here. It's 150 grams of carb a day. That might not be enough for you to put on weight. So if you went up to 45%, and I'm just doing an average 2,000 calorie diet, then you're at 225 grams. So 150 to 225 grams of carbs a day is completely sensible. If you are overweight and you're trying to lose weight, and that's not the general situation with people who have NTM or bronchiectasis, but sometimes it is. And I will say, try not to lose weight when you're actively infected, because when you have active inflammation and you lose weight, you're more likely to lose lean body mass than fat mass. And we don't want that. So lose weight at an appropriate time, meaning when you're not actively fighting an infection. But in the event that you are carrying, say, a lot of extra weight and want to lose weight, and you're and you're pre-diabetic, it's okay to do less than 100 grams of carb a day. You can go pretty low, but it's unusual. It's rare that I recommend that in this population of people.
Okay. When is the best time to take probiotics? Not with your antibiotics.
Thank you. Yeah, let's not just put competing things together. So we generally, just as a general rule, we might say take your probiotics with your meals, because you're likely not to take your antibiotics with your meals. So I think that's appropriate.
And also you space it at least 2 to 4 hours apart
from your
antibiotics.
Yeah, I think that's
apart.
Yeah.
Should I take probiotics if I'm taking antibiotics but do not have stomach issues?
Yeah, that's a good question. So if you're on the pretty intensive antibiotic regimens that are characteristic of bronchiectasis or NTM-LD treatments, then I do think it's prudent to do that. And the reason is you can develop symptoms at any time. We've seen people be fine for 8 months and then have bad diarrhea. So we do think to some degree it's good to get them on board just as a precaution or as potentially prevention. As long as you don't have any negative side effects from the probiotics, then we do recommend them, especially when you're on the antibiotics.
Okay. We have one more comment. For the gut health talk, Google leaky gut treatments to see all the various products that flood the market. I believe food intake is the real answer, and looking forward to the next talk. We are looking forward to your next webinar too, Michelle.
Thanks. Okay, thank you for the leaky gut. I had forgotten about that. So that's a good, something good to look at, more homework.
So we are at 8:30. We've answered a lot of really great questions. I think we are ready to wrap up. Everybody, thank you for sending your questions in. Thank you for posting all these great questions. Michelle, thank
Good
you for joining us once again. Everyone, don't forget we have an upcoming webinar, Building and Maintaining Assertive Relationships, on Monday, August 22nd at 7 p.m. with Dr. Devin Smith. And we hope you'll be able to join us. Everyone have a wonderful rest of the week, and we will see you all soon. Thank you, everybody, for
Thanks,
joining
Minnie.
us.
Thanks,
Thank
everybody.
you.
Bye now.
Bye.